The fire has burned low, but the night is nowhere near finished. Beyond the walls, the landscape has disappeared into darkness. There are no street lamps marking a road, no glowing numbers beside the bed, no distant engines carrying through the air. The only light comes from embers, a small oil flame, perhaps the moon pressing a pale shape through an opening in the roof. Somewhere nearby, another person shifts beneath a blanket. Farther away, an animal calls once and falls silent. No clock announces that it is 10 in the evening, midnight, or 3 in the morning. Time is felt instead through cold, hunger, the position of stars, the fading of fire, and the changing sounds of people and animals moving through the dark. For most of human history, sleep begins in a world like this. It does not arrive according to a number printed on a schedule. It emerges from the meeting of biology with season, temperature, safety, labor, hunger, custom, and light. A winter night in northern Europe may stretch for many hours beyond the body's need for continuous sleep. A hot afternoon near the Mediterranean may make daytime work difficult and a period of rest practical. A hunting camp in eastern Africa may remain quietly alert because different people become sleepy at different times. A farming household may stay awake after sunset to repair tools, prepare food, talk, pray, or simply enjoy the only unhurried part of the day. The ancient night is not empty. It is a changing territory, and human sleep develops inside it. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Modern life often encourages a simple picture of healthy sleep. A person lies down at a regular hour, remains asleep in one unbroken block, and wakes 7 or 8 hours later refreshed. Anything that interrupts this pattern can feel like a malfunction. Waking at midnight may produce anxiety. Sleeping in the afternoon may seem lazy. Going to bed early and rising before dawn may appear unusual, unless work demands it. Yet the further one looks beyond electric light, alarm clocks, factory shifts, and standardized time, the less fixed the human pattern becomes. This does not mean that people in the past followed one alternative schedule. There was no single ancient rhythm obeyed by every society. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how common particular forms of divided sleep truly were. Some communities appear to have divided the night into 2 periods of sleep. Others favored a longer nighttime rest with an occasional nap. Many probably changed their habits with the seasons. Some individuals slept lightly, some deeply, some early, and some late, just as people do now. What survives in historical records and modern field studies suggests not a lost universal rule, but a remarkable capacity for variation. That flexibility may be one of the oldest features of human sleep. Compared with many other primates, humans generally spend less total time asleep, yet much of that sleep is unusually deep and efficient. This change did not occur in a bedroom. It unfolded across a long evolutionary history in which human ancestors increasingly rested on or near the ground, gathered around fire, and depended on social groups for protection. Sleeping on the ground brought advantages, including freedom from the unstable nests and limited space of trees, but it also created danger, predators, insects, rival groups, weather, and fire itself could disturb the night. Rest had to be deep enough to restore the body while remaining flexible enough for someone to wake when necessary. No one knows exactly how the earliest human groups arranged these hours. Fossils do not preserve bedtime. Stone tools say little about whether their makers slept continuously or in several episodes. Even ancient campsites rarely reveal the rhythm of a single night. researchers must work indirectly, comparing human biology with primate sleep, studying present-day communities living with limited artificial light, and examining written records from much later societies. Each source offers clues, but none provides a complete timetable for the human past. The clues do show that darkness alone did not force everyone immediately into sleep. Fire changed the night long before electricity did. It extended social time, offered warmth, discouraged some predators, and created a place where knowledge could be shared after daytime work ended. Around a controlled flame, the dark became less absolute. People could maintain tools, process food, tend injuries, strengthen relationships, or watch the weather. Evening wakefulness may have helped turn sleep from an isolated biological necessity into a group activity shaped by trust and cooperation. At the same time, firelight was weak compared with modern illumination. A hearth brightens faces while leaving the surrounding space in shadow. An oil lamp permits close work but cannot transform an entire settlement into day. The body still receives a strong contrast between daylight and darkness. Temperatures fall, activity slows, melatonin rises. The night presses inward even when people resist it for a while. This difference matters because the human biological clock responds not only to whether light exists, but also to its brightness, timing, color, and regularity. Season adds another layer. Near the equator, the length of day changes relatively little across the year, though rainfall, heat, insects, food availability, and work still alter sleeping conditions. At higher latitudes, winter darkness may last far longer than summer darkness. A household cannot necessarily sleep for every hour without sunlight. If darkness begins in late afternoon and continues until morning, people may spend part of that interval awake before bed, between sleeps, or before dawn. In summer, the opposite problem appears. Long evenings and early light can shorten the opportunity for rest, especially during intense agricultural work. Temperature may be as important as light. The body tends to begin sleep as core temperature falls, and people without climate-controlled rooms often sleep in closer relationship with the natural cooling of the night. In some communities, bedtime follows the drop in temperature more closely than sunset itself. This helps explain why the romantic image of ancient people falling asleep the moment darkness arrives is often misleading. They may remain awake for hours, waiting for the air to cool, finishing tasks or sharing time with others. Daily labor also refuses to fit a single pattern. Farming, herding, fishing, hunting, craft production, domestic work, religious observance, and travel create different demands. A shepherd watching animals does not sleep like a city artisan. A household during harvest does not rest as it does in winter. Sailors, guards, healers, and travelers may sleep whenever opportunity appears. Even within one home, age, health, responsibility, and temperament divide the night differently. There is also the quiet influence of chronotype, the biological tendency to become sleepy and alert at particular times. Some people naturally wake early, others remain alert long after those around them have begun to rest. In a small group, this variation can mean that almost every hour of darkness contains at least one wakeful person, without anyone being officially assigned to stand guard. The surprising possibility is that collective safety may depend not on every person following the same ancient schedule, but on people being different from one another. The world before clocks therefore does not reveal a perfect lost system waiting to be restored. It reveals something more interesting. Human sleep appears less like a rigid program and more like a negotiation. The body brings its need for restoration, its circadian rhythm, and its accumulating pressure for sleep. The environment answers with darkness, heat, cold, danger, noise, and seasonal change. Society adds work, ritual, companionship, obligation, and habit. From this negotiation emerge many possible patterns. Among them is one arrangement that left a strange trail through old documents: a sleep that came first, a wakeful interval hidden in the middle of the night, and then another sleep before morning. It was ordinary enough in some places to require no explanation, yet unfamiliar enough today to sound almost like a forgotten custom from another species. The trail begins not in a laboratory, but in the casual words of people who assumed everyone already understood what they meant. The words appear quietly, often buried inside records that were never intended to preserve the history of sleep. A witness describes hearing a noise after his first sleep. A physician advises a patient what to do between the first and second sleep. A servant rises before the household's second rest. A traveller mentions waking in the dead of night, tending the fire, speaking with a companion, and returning to bed. The writers do not pause to define these expressions. They use them as if the pattern were familiar, as ordinary as breakfast or sunset. Across parts of pre-industrial Europe, especially in records from the late medieval and early modern periods, references to a first sleep and a second sleep occur often enough to suggest that nighttime rest was sometimes divided into two recognizable phases. The first sleep generally began several hours after dusk, though the exact timing shifted with season, occupation, household custom, and social rank. After sleeping for a few hours, a person might wake around the middle of the night and remain awake for a period that could range from a brief interval to an hour or more. Sleep then returned, carrying the household toward dawn. This pattern is commonly called segmented sleep. It differs from the modern experience of waking briefly, turning over, and forgetting the interruption by morning. In the historical model, the wakeful interval could be expected and meaningful. It formed part of the night rather than breaking it. People may have regarded the first and second sleeps as separate portions of rest, each with its own place in the rhythm of darkness. The strongest modern case for this interpretation was developed through decades of work by historian A. Roger E. Kirch, who collected references from court testimony, diaries, medical writing, literature, religious texts, and household accounts. The examples span several languages and regions, though the evidence is richest in Europe. They include terms equivalent to first sleep, initial sleep, morning sleep, and second sleep. In some passages, the distinction is unmistakable. Events are placed after the first sleep or before the second, suggesting a shared understanding of where those moments belonged in the night. Court records are especially revealing because they preserve ordinary details by accident. A dispute, theft, fire, assault, or suspicious sound required witnesses to explain where they had been and what they were doing. Someone might state that the household had completed its first sleep when a disturbance occurred. Another might remember getting out of bed during the interval before sleeping again. These people were not composing theories about human biology. They were trying to establish a sequence of events. Their casual references are valuable precisely because sleep itself was not the subject under investigation. Medical texts also distinguish between portions of nighttime rest. Some writers believe the body processed food differently during the first sleep and encouraged particular postures or activities before the second. Such advice was shaped by medical theories now abandoned, including ideas about humours and digestion, but the language still indicates that divided sleep was recognizable to at least some readers. Religious manuals recommended prayers during the night. Household guides referred to tasks performed after waking. Literary works used the first sleep as a marker of time, trusting that an audience would understand the expression without explanation. The pattern was not limited to formal writing. In a world without inexpensive clocks, people organized time through events and bodily rhythms. They spoke of cockcrow, moonrise, the extinguishing of candles, the changing of guards, and the stages of sleep. First sleep could function as a practical unit of nighttime measurement, saying that something happened after it may have been more useful than naming an hour that few people could verify. Yet the historical trail is not as simple as it first appears. Niall Boyce and other critics have warned that references to first and second sleep do not automatically prove that most people regularly spent a long period awake every night. Language can preserve possibilities without describing universal habits. A person may refer to a first sleep only because that particular night was interrupted. A second sleep might mean returning to bed after an unusual disturbance rather than following a standard schedule. Some literary phrases may be metaphorical, regional, class-specific, or copied from older traditions. The central disagreement is therefore not whether divided sleep existed. The documents clearly show that it did. The harder question is how widespread, regular, and socially standardized it was. Did most households in certain regions expect 2 sleeps each night? Or did the vocabulary simply offer a convenient way to describe occasional interruptions? Did the pattern dominate for centuries? Or did it appear mainly under particular seasonal and environmental conditions? Did it belong equally to rural labourers, urban artisans, elites, servants, and travellers? The surviving text cannot answer every version of these questions. Written evidence is always uneven. Literate people were not a random sample of the population. Court testimony reaches the page only when something unusual happened. Medical advice reveals what authors recommended, not necessarily what readers practiced. Literary works exaggerate, symbolize, and borrow. Even a large collection of references may overrepresent regions where archives survived, and underrepresent communities whose nightly habits were never written down. There is also the problem of geography. Historical evidence from England, France, Italy, and the other parts of Europe cannot simply be transformed into a statement about all ancient humans. Europe's long winter nights, household architecture, Christian devotional practices, labour systems, and patterns of artificial lighting created particular conditions. Other societies developed their own arrangements. Some emphasized midday rest. Some slept communally. Some maintained late evening activity and rose early without a long midnight interval. Some adjusted constantly to heat, rain, animals, ritual, or seasonal work. Even within Europe, sleep was unlikely to remain identical across the year. Winter darkness could provide a long window in which 2 substantial sleeps and a wakeful interval were possible. Summer offered less time. Agricultural labour sometimes demanded rising before dawn or working late into the evening. Illness, pregnancy, age, hunger, cold, crowded rooms, insects, and noise all disturbed rest in ways that documents rarely measure. The phrase people use to sleep twice therefore carries both truth and danger. It captures a real historical pattern, one that modern assumptions had largely forgotten. But it can easily become too broad. There was no single pre-industrial night shared by every person. Some likely slept in 2 clearly separated phases. Others may have done so only during long winters. Many probably woke briefly without assigning the interval special meaning. Still others slept continuously whenever comfort and safety allowed. What makes the evidence important is not that it replaces one rigid rule with another. It shows that uninterrupted sleep was not always treated as the only normal form of rest. A person who woke after several hours might not immediately fear that something had gone wrong. The night still contained space. Darkness had not yet become a narrow corridor between bedtime and the alarm. Inside that space, people did more than wait for sleep to return. The interval could become a private chamber of the day, a quiet period when social demands weakened. Fires were renewed, thoughts wandered, and the household briefly stirred beneath the larger silence of the sleeping world. To understand why divided sleep mattered, one must step into those wakeful hours and see what people believed the middle of the night was for. The middle of the night was not always treated as wasted time. In households where a first sleep and second sleep were familiar, the interval between them could become one of the quietest and most personal parts of the day. The fire had settled. The streets were still. Work had paused. But morning obligations had not yet begun. For a short time, the ordinary structure of life loosened. Some people remained in bed. They adjusted blankets, spoke softly, reflected on dreams, or waited for drowsiness to return. Others rose to tend the hearth, check animals, use the chamber pot, drink water, or complete small household tasks. In crowded rooms, where several family members or servants might sleep within hearing distance of one another, wakefulness was rarely entirely private. A person stirring in the dark could wake a companion. A whispered conversation might begin. The interval could become social without becoming noisy. Historical sources associate these hours with prayer. Christian devotional traditions often regarded the night as a spiritually charged period, removed from the distractions of daytime labor. Monastic communities formalized nocturnal worship, but lay people also received advice about prayers to recite after waking. The stillness of the hour encouraged reflection on mortality, guilt, gratitude, and divine judgment. The world seemed suspended, and in that suspension the boundary between ordinary thought and religious imagination could feel thinner. This did not mean that every midnight awakening became a sacred ritual. Many were practical. A household depending on a fire for warmth could not always allow it to die completely before morning. Someone might rearrange embers, add fuel, or make sure sparks had not escaped. In winter, the task could be essential. A poorly maintained hearth risked leaving the room bitterly cold before dawn, while an untended flame could threaten timber, thatch, and bedding. The person awake between sleeps occupied a small position of responsibility, even if no one named it as such. Domestic labor also entered these hours. Women and men might prepare materials for the next day, mend clothing, spin fibers, inspect food, or organize tools. The work was usually limited by darkness and fuel. Candles, rushlights, and oil lamps cost money, and their illumination was weak. Yet not every task required bright light. Familiar objects could be handled by touch. Repetitive work could continue beside a low flame. In poorer households, using the wakeful interval efficiently may have mattered, especially during seasons when daylight was short and labor demands remained high. The night also offered time for conversation that crowded days did not. Couples could speak without the full household listening, though complete privacy was uncommon by modern standards. Rooms were shared, walls were thin, and beds could hold more than 2 people depending on class and circumstance. Even so, the darkness created a form of privacy through lowered voices and reduced movement. Plans, worries, grievances, and affection could surface when the visible world had receded. Some historical writers connected the interval with intimacy. The body, having rested for several hours, may have felt less exhausted than it did at the end of the working day. This has led some historians to suggest that the period between sleeps created a favourable time for sexual activity. The evidence is suggestive rather than complete, and scholars still debate how representative these references are. Advice in medical or religious texts does not reveal the frequency of actual behaviour. Still, the idea fits the broader pattern. The middle of the night was not necessarily regarded as a void to be crossed without waking. Dreams also mattered. A person emerging from a first sleep might remember images with unusual clarity. Before modern psychology, dreams could be interpreted as warnings, moral tests, bodily signals, or messages from beyond ordinary experience. The wakeful interval offered time to consider them before a second sleep blurred the memory. Some people recorded dreams, discussed them, prayed over them, or changed plans because of them. The darkness encouraged meanings that daylight might weaken. There were less peaceful uses as well. Nighttime was associated with secrecy, illicit meetings, theft, smuggling, and movement beyond supervision. Court records survive partly because someone was awake to hear a door, footsteps, animals, or voices. A divided night created witnesses. One person's quiet interval became another person's alibi or accusation. The same pattern that made room for prayer and reflection also made room for suspicion. Medical thinking gave the interval another purpose. Early modern theories often described digestion as a process unfolding through the night. Some physicians believed the first sleep assisted one stage of digestion and the second completed another. People might be advised to change sleeping position, avoid certain foods, or perform small actions between the two periods. These explanations were based on physiological models that modern medicine no longer accepts, but they reveal an important assumption: waking between sleeps was not automatically considered pathological. That difference in interpretation may be more significant than the precise length of the interval. Modern sleepers often become anxious the moment they realize they are awake. They check the time, calculate how many hours remain, and worry about the next day. The fear of not sleeping activates the very alertness they hope to escape. In a society where nighttime waking is expected, the same event may feel less threatening. A person can lie quietly, perform a familiar task, or wait without believing the body has failed. This does not mean pre-industrial people slept peacefully. Their nights could be cold, crowded, noisy, smoky, uncomfortable, and unsafe. Fleas, lice, illness, pain, hunger, and hard bedding disturbed rest. Animals moved nearby. Streets carried voices and occasional danger. A romantic image of serene households drifting through two perfect sleeps would be as misleading as the claim that everyone slept continuously. The surviving record shows adaptation, not comfort. The duration of midnight wakefulness also varied. Thomas Vare's later laboratory experiment, conducted under long periods of darkness, produced a striking interval of calm wakefulness lasting several hours in some participants. Historical accounts are often less precise. Without clocks, people estimated time through sensation, fire, moonlight, or the progress of familiar activities. An interval described as long may not correspond neatly to a measured modern hour. What mattered was its place in the sequence of night. There is a subtle distinction between being awake and being fully active. The interval may often have occupied a state between the two. People could remain physically still while mentally alert, They might experience a quiet, almost meditative awareness, supported by hormonal conditions different from those of daytime. Wehr noted that participants exposed to extended darkness showed patterns of prolactin associated with calm rest during the waking period. This does not prove that historical sleepers experience the same physiology, but it offers one possible explanation for why the interval could feel restful rather than frustrating. The lesser-known story of segmented sleep is therefore not simply that people slept twice. It is that wakefulness itself once held a different meaning. The night was not divided into successful sleep and failed sleep. It contained several legitimate states: deep rest, dreaming, quiet awareness, prayer, intimacy, work, and waiting. The boundary between them was softer. That older attitude left traces in language long after the habits themselves began to change. Expressions about first sleep and second sleep survived because they carried a shared map of the night. To follow that map further, historians have had to search through texts where sleep appears only in passing, hidden among crimes, remedies, household instructions, poems, and prayers. The evidence is scattered, and its interpretation remains contested. But together these fragments reveal how ordinary words can preserve a vanished way of experiencing time. The evidence for divided sleep did not arrive through a single dramatic discovery. No buried bedroom was opened with two mattresses labelled for separate phases of the night. No ancient clock preserved a precise interval of wakefulness. Instead, the pattern emerged from language, and language is both one of history's richest archives and one of its most treacherous. A phrase such as first sleep seems simple, yet simplicity can conceal several meanings. It may refer to the first portion of an expected two-part night. It may describe an ordinary sleep interrupted by noise, illness, work, or fear. It may be a literary device, a regional expression, or a way of estimating time when few people owned clocks. The challenge is not merely finding the words, it is deciding what kind of life the words reveal. Roger Kirch built his case by gathering references scattered across centuries of European writing. The sources were remarkably varied. Court depositions placed crimes and disturbances after the first sleep. Medical texts discussed bodily processes before the second. Religious works recommended prayer during the interval. Plays and poems used the language without explanation. Household accounts and personal diaries mentioned people rising, speaking, working, or returning to bed. Taken together, these references appear to describe a night with an internal structure that readers already understood. The most persuasive examples are those in which the sequence is difficult to interpret any other way. A witness wakes after a first sleep, performs an activity, and later resumes sleeping. A writer distinguishes the first sleep from a morning sleep. A physician offers separate advice for what happens before and after the interval. Here, the language does more than describe an accidental awakening. It suggests a recognized pattern. But historical vocabulary is rarely a transparent window. Niall Boyce has argued that some examples may have been read too confidently. A second sleep does not always imply a standard two-sleep system. Anyone awakened by a barking dog, a sick relative, a storm, or a household task might speak of sleeping again. A text that mentions two sleeps on one night cannot automatically prove the same rhythm governed every night. Even repeated phrases may preserve convention rather than behavior. This is where the debate becomes less about whether segmented sleep existed and more about scale. How many people practiced it? How often, in which seasons? Under what conditions did the pattern belong mainly to long winter nights? Or did it continue throughout the year? Was it common among rural families but less so in cities? Did the wealthy, with better heating and more candles, experience darkness differently from those who could not afford to extend evening activity? The documents offer clues, but rarely the statistical answers modern researchers would prefer. Court records illustrate both the power and the weakness of the evidence. They preserve ordinary voices more often than elite literature does, sometimes capturing labourers, servants, neighbours, and household members who left no diaries. Yet these voices appear only because something unusual brought them before an authority. A theft, quarrel, suspicious death, fire, or trespass turns a normal night into testimony. The record may tell us that someone woke after a first sleep, but it does not tell us how many quiet nights passed without such an interruption. Medical writing has a different bias. Physicians described what they believed should happen, often using theories of digestion, humours, and bodily balance that no longer guide medicine. Their advice may reflect common practice, but it may also reflect an ideal. A recommendation to lie on one side during the first sleep and another during the second shows that the distinction was intelligible. It does not show that every patient obeyed it. Literature introduces yet another layer. Writers depend on shared assumptions, but they also borrow old phrases, exaggerate for effect, and place familiar language in unusual situations. A reference in a play may show that an audience recognized the expression, though not how regularly they lived by it. Poetry can preserve cultural memory long after daily habits have changed. A phrase may remain vivid because it once described ordinary life, or because it had become archaic and evocative. Translation complicates matters further. Terms that appear equivalent to first sleep or second sleep do not always carry identical meanings across languages. A translator may choose modern words that make the pattern seem clearer than it was in the original. Regional dialect can distinguish early night sleep, deep sleep, morning sleep, or a return to sleep in ways that resist neat comparison. To reconstruct a universal human rhythm from such material would require more certainty than the sources can provide. There is also an enormous silence in the archive. Most people in the pre-industrial world did not record their nights. Many societies relied on oral tradition. Countless documents were lost to fire, war, damp, neglect, and deliberate destruction. European archives survive unevenly, and their richness can create the illusion that Europe represents humanity. It does not. The abundance of evidence in one region may reveal more about preservation and literacy than about the global distribution of sleep patterns. Still, absence of universal proof is not proof of absence. The language matters because it shows that some communities possessed a vocabulary for dividing the night in ways that modern English largely no longer does. When a society names a recurring experience, the name can shape how people interpret it. Waking after several hours may feel ordinary when the culture has a place for it. The same awakening may feel alarming when the only accepted model is continuous sleep. This linguistic shift can be seen in the gradual fading of the old expressions. As artificial lighting spread, urban evenings lengthened, working hours became more standardized, and bedtime moved later. References to first and second sleep became less common. The disappearance was not sudden, nor can it be blamed on one invention. Candles, oil lamps, gaslight, factory bells, public entertainment, printed schedules, and eventually electric light all contributed to changing the social meaning of night. Language followed behaviour, though never perfectly. A term can vanish before the experience does. People continued to wake in the night, but they increasingly described the event as broken sleep. insomnia, restlessness, or disturbance. The same bodily state acquired a new interpretation. What had once occupied a recognized interval between two sleeps became an interruption inside one expected block. That change reveals why historical language is more than decorative evidence. Words do not simply report behavior, they organize it. They tell people what counts as normal, what requires concern, and what kind of story the body is living through. The old vocabulary suggests that the night once possessed more than one legitimate rhythm. Yet even the most convincing phrases cannot tell us whether this rhythm reaches back into deep prehistory. Written records extend only a small distance into the human past. To ask whether divided sleep reflects an older biological capacity, historians must hand the question to physiology, anthropology, and the study of communities living beyond the full reach of industrial time. There, the story becomes both clearer and more complicated, because the human body proves capable of sleeping in several ways without declaring any one of them the original design. Written language can carry the trail only so far. Beyond the first diaries, court records, medical manuals, and religious texts lies the greater part of human history, a span in which no one recorded bedtime, midnight waking, or the return of sleep before dawn. For hundreds of thousands of years, human beings slept without leaving direct testimony. The question then becomes more difficult: was segmented sleep a cultural habit created by particular societies? Or did those societies merely reveal an older biological possibility already present in the human body? The safest answer is that both biology and culture were involved, though neither provides a universal rule. Humans appear physiologically capable of sleeping in more than one phase. That ability may be ancient, but capability is not destiny. A body that can produce 2 sleeps does not require 2 sleeps every night. Just as the ability to nap does not mean every population will build its day around a siesta. The most famous experimental evidence comes from research conducted by psychiatrist Thomas Wehr in the early 1990s. 7 healthy men were placed on a schedule that gave them approximately 14 hours of darkness each day. This was far longer than the usual dark period available in a modern electrically lit home. At first, the participants extended their sleep, apparently repaying accumulated sleep debt. After several weeks, a striking pattern emerged. Their nighttime rest tended to divide into 2 periods, each lasting roughly 4 hours, separated by 1 to 3 hours of quiet wakefulness. The interval was not described simply as frustrated insomnia. Participants often rested calmly in the dark before returning to sleep. Hormonal patterns also differed from ordinary daytime wakefulness, suggesting a state with its own physiological character. The experiment demonstrated something important under prolonged darkness. The human sleep system can organize itself into 2 nighttime phases without being deliberately trained to do so. It did not demonstrate that every ancient person slept this way. The study involved only 7 participants. The environment was artificial, and 14 hours of darkness is not typical of every latitude or season. The participants were modern people entering a laboratory, not prehistoric communities living around fires, animals, social obligations, weather, and danger. Wehr's results reveal a latent capacity, not a fossilized timetable from humanity's past. That distinction is easily lost because the experiment fits so neatly with the historical language of first and second sleep. Long winter darkness in pre-industrial Europe could have created conditions somewhat similar to the laboratory schedule. If evening light was weak and night stretched far beyond the amount of sleep a person needed, 2 phases separated by wakefulness might arise naturally. Culture could then name, normalize, and organize the interval. The physiology supplied the possibility, the environment made it practical, society gave it meaning. Yet this explanation works best for certain places and seasons. Near the equator, nights do not expand into 14-hour winter darkness. In hot regions, the more important division may occur between nighttime sleep and daytime rest. Agricultural work may begin before sunrise and pause when afternoon heat becomes intense. In other settings, people may stay awake late around fire and still rise early, creating a shorter main sleep supplemented by an occasional nap. The same flexible system can produce different outward patterns. This is why the idea of a single ancestral sleep schedule is misleading. Human evolution did not unfold in one climate. Populations moved through tropical forests, savannas, deserts, mountains, coasts, and eventually high latitudes with dramatic seasonal changes in daylight. They faced different predators, temperatures, food cycles, and social demands. A rigid sleep program would have been less useful than one capable of adjustment. Human sleep may be unusual among primates partly because it became shorter, deeper, and more efficient. Many other primates spend longer periods resting, often in elevated sleeping sites. Human ancestors increasingly occupied the ground, where sleep could be more dangerous but also more socially protected. Fire, group size, weapons, shelters, and shared vigilance may have reduced some risks. Deep sleep could become possible within a cooperative group, while individual differences in timing ensured that not everyone was unconscious at once. Research among Hadza hunter-gatherers offers a glimpse of how such variation can operate. People within the same camp differ in chronotype. Some settle earlier, some later, and others wake more often. Across many nights, there is usually someone awake during most portions of darkness, even without a formal guard schedule. This sentinel-like pattern does not require every individual to divide sleep into two equal parts. Safety may emerge from diversity rather than uniformity. That possibility complicates the popular image of an entire ancient camp sleeping once, waking together in the middle of the night, and then returning collectively to rest. Real communities were probably less synchronized. A nursing adult, an older person, a light sleeper, someone tending a fire, and someone naturally inclined to stay awake late could create overlapping periods of alertness. Human groups may have benefited because bodies did not all follow exactly the same rhythm. Daytime napping adds another layer. Genetic research indicates that the tendency to nap has a biological component. Certain inherited patterns are associated with daytime sleep, early waking, or greater sleepiness. But genes do not determine a single outcome. The same tendency may be encouraged by heat, meal timing, work schedules, age, health, or poor nighttime rest. Biology creates variation on which culture and environment act. The afternoon dip in alertness is also real, though it is often oversimplified. Many people experience reduced vigilance in the early afternoon even without a heavy meal. This reflects an interaction between rising homeostatic sleep pressure and the circadian system's changing signals for wakefulness. A short nap can fit into that valley, but not everyone becomes sleepy enough to sleep, and not every society permits it. The presence of a biological dip does not prove that midday sleep was universal, or that humans learned to nap in one decisive evolutionary moment. Field studies in communities with limited access to electric light are especially important because they test romantic assumptions about ancestral living. Measurements among the Hadza of Tanzania, San communities in Namibia, and Simone people in Bolivia found that daytime naps occurred on a minority of recorded days. They were somewhat more frequent in warmer seasons, but not dominant. Long periods of wakefulness in the middle of the night were also uncommon. These observations do not erase the European historical evidence or Wehr's laboratory results. They show that neither can stand for all human experience. The absence of electricity does not recreate prehistory. Present-day communities have their own histories, economies, social changes, tools, trade networks, and environmental pressures. They are not living fossils. Still, their sleep patterns demonstrate that strong natural light-dark cycles do not automatically produce 2 nightly sleeps or a daily nap. Temperature, activity, social organization, and local custom remain decisive. The deeper evolutionary story is therefore not about discovering the one schedule humanity has forgotten. It is about recognizing a system designed for responsiveness. Human sleep can consolidate into one block when nights are short. Work schedules demand it, and sleeping conditions remain stable. It can divide under long darkness. It can shift later around evening fire or artificial light. It can be supplemented by a nap during heat, sleep deprivation, illness, or cultural pause. It can fragment when danger, caregiving, noise, or discomfort make continuous rest impossible. This flexibility would have carried both benefits and costs. A fragmented night may preserve vigilance but reduce restorative sleep if interruptions become excessive. A nap may improve alertness but delay nighttime sleep if it is too long or too late. A long dark interval may allow 2 satisfying sleeps, while the same pattern imposed by a rotating work schedule may disrupt circadian timing. Context changes the meaning of the pattern. What survives from deep history is not a command to sleep twice. It is a capacity to negotiate with the world. Darkness, temperature, security, labor, and companionship all shaped the form that rest took. Human beings did not simply obey an internal clock untouched by culture, nor did culture invent sleep from nothing. The rhythm emerged from their constant interaction. That interaction becomes clearest when the 2 most familiar forms of divided sleep are placed side by side. One divides the night itself. The other preserves a main nighttime sleep but adds a second period during the day. They are often grouped under the same label, yet they arise from different environments, traditions, and pressures, and their histories extend far beyond the European archive. The 2 most familiar forms of divided sleep, one split across the night, the other divided between night and afternoon, look different on the surface. But both emerge from the same fact: human alertness does not rise steadily after waking and then fall in one smooth descent toward bedtime. The body is governed by interacting forces whose overlap creates windows in which sleep becomes easier, wakefulness becomes harder, and a second period of rest can feel almost inevitable. The first force is sleep pressure. From the moment a person wakes, the need for sleep gradually accumulates. The longer wakefulness continues, the stronger this pressure becomes. Sleep reduces that pressure, though the process is influenced by prior rest, illness, age, stress, and the quality of the sleeping environment. If sleep pressure acted alone, alertness would simply decline hour by hour. A person would wake at their highest level of energy and become progressively sleepier until night. Yet that is not what most people experience. Alertness often improves after morning grogginess, remains fairly stable through part of the day, weakens in the early afternoon, rises again toward evening, and finally falls more sharply at night. The circadian timing system helps explain this pattern. The circadian clock is a biological timing network centered in the brain and synchronized by environmental signals, especially light. It influences sleepiness, body temperature, hormone release, digestion, and attention. Rather than merely allowing sleep pressure to increase unchecked, it produces signals that promote wakefulness at some times and favor sleep at others. This interaction creates a curious feature of the day for many people. Alertness falls in the early to mid-afternoon, even after a normal night's sleep and even when lunch has been light. A heavy meal can intensify drowsiness, but it does not create the entire effect. The dip can appear without food because the circadian wake-promoting signal temporarily weakens while sleep pressure has already been building for hours. This afternoon valley helps explain why midday rest has appeared repeatedly across different societies. It does not prove that every population developed a formal nap tradition, nor does it establish one ancient moment when people learned to sleep twice. It reveals a biological opening that cultures may use differently. In one climate, the valley coincides with extreme heat and work pauses naturally. In another, school, business, or factory schedules push people through it. The physiology may be shared, but the social response varies. The second major valley comes at night, when circadian signals begin to favor sleep and accumulated sleep pressure is high. Under ordinary modern conditions, these forces often support one consolidated period of rest. But long darkness can alter the shape of the night. If a person goes to bed unusually early because darkness begins early and evening activity is limited, the first several hours of sleep may reduce sleep pressure substantially. Circadian night is not yet over, but the body no longer carries the same urgent need to remain asleep. A period of quiet wakefulness can emerge before sleep pressure and circadian timing align again for a second sleep. This helps make sense of the pattern in Thomas Ware's long darkness experiment. The participants were not simply waking because they had failed to sleep properly. Their first sleep had reduced pressure, while the extended biological night still created conditions for another sleep later. The interval occupied a different physiological landscape shaped by darkness and low activity. The relationship between these forces is delicate. A nap taken during the afternoon valley can reduce sleep pressure and improve alertness, but it may also make nighttime sleep more difficult if it lasts too long or occurs too late. A short nap often provides enough relief to sharpen attention without greatly delaying bedtime. This is why the effects of napping depend so strongly on timing, duration, and the individual. Chronotype changes the location of the valleys. A person whose biological clock runs earlier may become sleepy and alert at different times from someone with a later rhythm. Age shifts them as well. Health conditions, medications, irregular work, travel, and light exposure can move or blur the pattern. There is no universal hour when the entire species should nap or wake between sleeps. Light is especially powerful because it helps set the circadian clock. Bright morning light generally encourages earlier timing, while strong evening light can delay biological night. Pre-industrial firelight and candlelight extended activity. But they were usually far dimmer than modern electric lighting and screens. Today, a person may spend the evening under enough artificial light to postpone sleepiness, then wake in a dim, indoor morning that provides only a weak resetting signal. Temperature also rises and falls across the circadian cycle. Sleep often begins as core body temperature declines, while wakefulness becomes easier as it rises. In communities without air conditioning or central heating, natural temperature changes may strongly influence when people lie down and wake. Field studies have sometimes found that sleep begins hours after sunset, closer to the nightly fall in temperature than to darkness itself. This challenges the idea that people without electricity simply slept from sunset to sunrise. Food timing, exercise, and routine add further signals. The body learns regularity, repeated exposure to light, meals, work, and activity at particular times can stabilize or shift circadian timing over days and weeks. Staying up late once does not necessarily rewrite the clock, but repeatedly doing so can gradually reshape when sleep feels possible. This is why divided sleep cannot be understood by counting only the number of sleep episodes. Two people may both sleep twice in 24 hours while living through very different biological realities. One may sleep 7 hours at night and take a brief afternoon nap. Another may sleep in 2 nighttime phases during long winter darkness. A third may be forced by shift work to sleep when the circadian system is promoting wakefulness. The schedules appear similar on paper, but their effects can differ greatly. The lesser-known lesson is that the body does not possess a simple on switch for waking and an off switch for sleep. It moves through changing probabilities. At some hours, sleep is easier but not compulsory. At others, wakefulness is supported even when sleep pressure is high. The familiar evening second wind, when someone becomes more alert after struggling through the afternoon, belongs to this pattern. So does the sudden heaviness that arrives when the circadian wake signal finally declines at night. Human beings have built customs around these valleys for centuries, turning them into prayer, rest, meals, reduced labor, or social time. Neither response is entirely natural or unnatural. Both express a species whose biology is flexible, though not infinitely so. The ancient rhythm behind sleeping twice is therefore not a hidden command buried in the body. It is a set of openings created by the interaction of sleep pressure and circadian time. Whether those openings become a second sleep, a short nap, a period of quiet wakefulness, or nothing at all depends on the world built around them. Across different climates and societies, that world produced patterns far more varied than the simple contrast between ancient biphasic sleep and modern consolidated rest. Beyond the European language of first sleep and second sleep, divided rest appears in many forms, but rarely as one identical custom carried across the world. In some places, the night itself has been split. In others, the day opens briefly to sleep before work resumes. Elsewhere, people rest without necessarily sleeping, reducing activity during the hottest hours and returning to labor when temperature and light become more favorable. The shared feature is not a universal schedule. It is the repeated human tendency to shape sleep around climate, work, social life, and the body's changing levels of alertness. The midday nap is often associated with Mediterranean societies where long meals, hot afternoons, and later evening activity have encouraged a pause in the middle of the day. The Spanish siesta became the most internationally recognized example, though the word now carries more cultural weight than the practice itself. Historically, the pause could include a meal, rest, reduced commercial activity, or sleep. It was never followed in exactly the same way by every person, class, occupation, or region. Agricultural workers, shopkeepers, officials, and urban labourers faced different demands, and the length of the pause shifted with season and local custom. Similar patterns developed across parts of southern Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, Latin America, and Asia. Yet grouping them together as one ancient nap tradition can conceal as much as it reveals. In some communities, the pause reflects intense heat that makes physical labour inefficient or dangerous. In others, it follows an early start to the working day. Some people sleep deeply, some merely recline, and others use the period for eating, conversation, prayer, or household tasks. A cultural rest period may exist even when many individuals do not actually fall asleep. The relationship between afternoon rest and evening life is important. Where midday pauses are common, social activity may continue later into the night. Shops reopen, streets fill again, meals occur later, and households remain active after temperatures fall. The nap is not an isolated addition to an otherwise unchanged schedule. It belongs to a broader arrangement of the day. Removing it while preserving late-night activity and early morning work can reduce total sleep rather than modernize it. In regions where dawn labor is essential, a second sleep period may compensate for an early rising time. Farmers, fishers, market workers, and religious communities sometimes begin activity before sunrise. A rest later in the morning or early afternoon can restore alertness. Again, the pattern does not arise from one cause. Heat, work, meal timing, social expectations, and individual need overlap. Religious schedules have also divided sleep. Night prayers, dawn observance, fasting periods, and seasonal rituals can interrupt or reshape ordinary rest. In Islamic societies, daily prayer times influence the organization of waking hours, while Ramadan can shift meals, social activity, and sleep far into the night. Monastic traditions in Christianity, Buddhism, and other religions have formalized waking during hours when most people sleep. Such practices demonstrate the adaptability of the sleep system, but they do not prove that interruption is harmless under every condition. Repeated sleep loss can still accumulate when total rest is insufficient. In parts of East and South Asia, daytime napping has often been treated as practical rather than indulgent. A brief rest may occur at home, at work, in schools, or during a formal break. In some settings, the ability to sleep in public or semi-public places carries less stigma than it does in societies where daytime sleep is associated with laziness. Cultural permission matters. A person who expects a nap and has a protected opportunity for one may experience it differently from someone who falls asleep unintentionally because nighttime rest is inadequate. Japan offers a particularly revealing contrast through the practice commonly described as inamuri, or being present while asleep. It is not simply a scheduled nap tradition. It can signal exhaustion, diligence, social belonging, or permission to disengage briefly while remaining physically present. The practice shows that societies do not merely decide when sleep is acceptable. They also decide where it is acceptable, what it means, and whether it reflects discipline, privilege, weakness, or hard work. In China, midday sleep has long appeared in both domestic and institutional routines, though practice varies widely across regions and generations. A short post-lunch rest may be built into school or workplace schedules. For some, it supports alertness after an early start. For others, it becomes necessary because nighttime sleep is shortened by long working hours. The same outward habit can therefore represent either a well-integrated biphasic schedule or compensation for chronic sleep restriction. Across tropical environments, heat often provides an obvious explanation for daytime rest, but it should not be treated as the only one. The circadian afternoon dip exists even in temperate climates and air-conditioned buildings. Heat can deepen the valley and make activity more costly, but cultural routines determine whether people sleep, slow down, or continue working through it. Economic pressure can suppress a nap tradition even when the body and climate favor one. Field research among communities with little or no electric lighting complicates the assumption that such environments naturally produce biphasic sleep. Among the Hadza, Sandri, and seminary populations studied with wearable devices. Naps occurred on a minority of days. They became somewhat more common in warmer seasons, but they were not universal daily events. Long periods of wakefulness between two nighttime sleeps were also relatively uncommon. These findings matter because they challenge the idea that technological simplicity automatically reveals an ancestral pattern. The communities themselves should not be treated as replicas of the distant past. They live in the present, have their own histories, and interact with the neighboring societies, markets, medicine, trade, and political systems. Their environments also differ sharply from one another, yet their sleep shows that natural darkness and outdoor life can support consolidated nighttime rest without a formal second sleep. The human body permits variation, but culture and environment decide which possibilities become routine. Sleeping arrangements influence the pattern as well. People who sleep communally may experience more brief awakenings caused by movement, sound, fire tending, animals, or social interaction. These awakenings do not necessarily create a long, segmented interval. Shared sleeping can fragment rest in small ways while also providing warmth and security. Solitary sleeping may reduce some disturbances but increase others, including vigilance and anxiety. Architecture changes the night. Thick walls and enclosed courtyards manage heat differently from open shelters. Roof materials alter sound during rain. Raised platforms reduce insects. Shutters, curtains, and separate rooms change exposure to light and household movement. Wealth affects bedding, fuel, ventilation, and privacy. There was never one pre-industrial sleeping environment, just as there was never one pre-industrial schedule. Seasonal migration and mobile livelihoods add further complexity. Pastoralists may sleep differently while moving herds than while settled. Fishers may rest according to tides. Hunters may adjust to animal activity. Travelers sleep when safety and opportunity permit. In such lives, flexibility may be more important than consistency. A person can follow one pattern for weeks and another when conditions change. This variety explains why the phrase sleeping twice a day is both useful and incomplete. It describes a broad category but not a single human experience. A winter household waking between two nighttime sleeps, a farm worker resting during afternoon heat, a religious community rising before dawn, and a modern employee taking a 20-minute nap all occupy different biological and cultural arrangements. What links them is the refusal of human sleep to remain confined to one rigid block, yet flexibility has limits. The body still requires sufficient total rest, appropriate timing, and enough continuity to pass through essential stages of sleep. A divided schedule can meet those needs, but only when its parts fit together. The same pattern can become exhausting when imposed by poverty, shift work, caregiving demands, noise, or chronic illness. Across societies, sleep is never only a private act. It is shaped by who controls time, who is permitted to rest, who must remain available, and whose schedule defines the working day. The ancient and traditional rhythms of divided sleep therefore reveal more than biology. They reveal the organization of entire communities, written quietly into the hours when people close their eyes. A night is not the same length everywhere, and it is not the same length in January as it is in June. This simple fact placed human sleep under a seasonal pressure that modern indoor life often hides. Long before climate control, blackout curtains and electric schedules, darkness expanded and contracted around entire communities. The body carried its own rhythms, but those rhythms had to operate inside days that changed with latitude, weather, labour, and temperature. Near the equator, sunrise and sunset remain relatively stable through the year. Night does not suddenly double in length when winter arrives. This does not make sleep simple. Rainfall, humidity, insects, food availability, and seasonal work can still transform the sleeping environment. Yet the annual swing in daylight is modest compared with what people experience farther north or south. At higher latitudes, winter creates a different world. Darkness can begin in the late afternoon and continue deep into the morning. If a person goes indoors when daylight ends, the interval before sunrise may greatly exceed the amount of sleep the body requires. A continuous 14-hour sleep would be neither likely nor necessary for most adults. Some of that darkness must therefore be occupied by evening activity, early morning wakefulness, or an interval between two periods of sleep. This does not prove that every northern household adopted segmented sleep. It does help explain why the first sleep and second sleep pattern appears plausible in parts of pre-industrial Europe. Long winter nights created room for it. Weak artificial light limited what could be done after sunset, while cold and darkness discouraged movement outside. A person might remain awake around the hearth, sleep for several hours, wake when sleep pressure had declined, and return to rest before dawn. Summer reversed the conditions. The sun set late and returned early, agricultural work intensified, people could remain active outdoors for more of the day, and the opportunity for 2 substantial nighttime sleeps narrowed. If segmented sleep occurred, it may have shortened, shifted, or disappeared during the brightest months. The evidence remains incomplete because historical documents rarely record sleep continuously across an entire year. A phrase preserved in a winter court case may tell little about the same household in midsummer. Seasonal variation is one of the strongest reasons to resist the idea of a single ancient sleep schedule. Even one person living in one village may have slept differently from month to month. Winter could encourage longer rest, more time in bed, and occasional midnight wakefulness. Summer could bring later bedtimes, earlier rising, and greater daytime fatigue. Harvest, lambing, fishing seasons, religious festivals, and periods of scarcity altered the pattern again. The material conditions of winter mattered as much as darkness itself. A cold room changes the meaning of wakefulness. Leaving bed may require stepping onto an earthen or stone floor, adding fuel to a fire, checking animals, or rearranging bedding shared for warmth. Clothing worn during sleep could be substantial. Curtains around a bed helped trap heat among those who could afford them. In poorer homes, several people might sleep close together, not from preference, but because warmth was a collective resource. A long night, therefore, did not guarantee long, comfortable sleep. Smoke from the hearth could irritate the eyes and lungs. Fuel might be scarce. Damp walls, poor ventilation, insects, coughing, and crowded bedding interrupted rest. Winter darkness created the opportunity for segmented sleep, but discomfort could also create accidental fragmentation that had little to do with the stable cultural rhythm. Summer introduced different problems. Heat can delay sleep even after the sun has set. In warm climates, people may remain active late because the evening is more comfortable than the afternoon. Outdoor courtyards, rooftops, shaded spaces, and open windows become part of the sleeping environment. Rest may begin only when the air cools enough for the body to release heat effectively. This relationship between temperature and sleep appears in modern field research as well. In several communities with little electric lighting, people do not necessarily fall asleep at sunset. Bedtime may occur, hours later, often around the period when nighttime temperature is declining. Waking may correspond with the approach of the coolest part of the night, or with morning activity rather than the first trace of sunlight. The result is another correction to a popular story. Natural darkness does not function like a switch. Humans do not automatically become unconscious when the sun disappears. Evening fire, conversation, food preparation, tool repair, social ritual, and simple wakefulness continue after dusk. Temperature and habit can delay sleep, while moonlight and seasonal work alter activity. Moonlight itself may have mattered more before artificial illumination. A bright moon can change travel, hunting, social visits, and perceived safety. It also affects the brightness of sleeping spaces without sealed windows or heavy curtains. The influence was probably variable and modest compared with daylight, but in a world of deep darkness, even modest light can shape behavior. Cloud cover, snow, and landscape change nighttime brightness further. Snow reflects moonlight and starlight, making winter nights unexpectedly luminous. Dense forest absorbs light. Open desert preserves it. Coastal communities experience wind, tides, and reflected sky. The phrase before electricity contains many different nights. Latitude also shaped how people understood time. Where daylight changes dramatically, the length of an hour was not always treated as fixed in everyday practice. In some systems, daylight and darkness were divided into equal portions even as their actual duration changed through the year. A winter nighttime hour could therefore be longer than a summer one. Without standardized clocks in every household, people relied on bells, stars, fire, animal behavior, and bodily sensation. This makes historical estimates of sleep difficult to translate into modern numbers. A person claiming to wake at midnight may have meant the middle of the dark interval rather than 12 o'clock. Someone describing 2 hours of wakefulness may have been using an imprecise unit. The order of events is often more reliable than their measured duration. At extreme latitudes, the challenge becomes greater still. Communities living with very short winter days or summer nights developed cultural methods for maintaining routine when sunlight offered weak guidance. Work, meals, social gathering, and inherited custom helped stabilize time. Human beings can maintain sleep under such conditions, but seasonal insomnia, fatigue, and mood changes show that adaptation is not perfect. Pre-industrial people were not immune to these difficulties. Long darkness could encourage rest, but it could also produce boredom, anxiety, reduced activity, and irregular timing. Endless summer light could support labor while making sleep harder to initiate. The past should not be imagined as a world in effortless harmony with nature. Nature rarely offers effortless harmony. The body negotiates with season rather than obeying it completely. Circadian timing responds to light, but social schedules can resist that signal. Sleep pressure encourages rest, but work can postpone it. Cold can keep a person in bed while discomfort prevents deep sleep. Heat can create an afternoon pause while social life continues late into the night. The surprising detail is that ancient sleep may have been less stable across the calendar than modern sleep. Not more. Today, electric lighting and controlled temperature allow many people to maintain similar bedtimes throughout the year. Before those technologies, the difference between a winter night and a summer night was not merely visible outside. It entered the household, altered labor, changed the availability of fuel, and reshaped the hours open to sleep. Segmented sleep may therefore have flourished where long darkness, limited evening light, and seasonal routines aligned. Midday sleep may have appeared where heat, Early labour and social permission made it practical. Neither pattern can be separated from geography. As artificial light grew brighter and more affordable, it began to weaken this old partnership between sleep and season. Evening no longer ended when the hearth dimmed. Winter darkness could be pushed back. Public life expanded after sunset. Bedtime shifted, and the long interval that once held 2 sleeps began to compress into a single scheduled night. The first great transformation of the night did not begin with electricity. It began much earlier, whenever human beings learned to hold back darkness with flame. A hearth extended conversation. A torch made movement possible beyond the shelter. An oil lamp allowed hands to work after sunset. A candle placed a small circle of usable time around a table or bed. Yet for most of history, these lights remained weak, costly, smoky, and local. They illuminated faces and objects without turning night into day. Firelight changed human life profoundly, but it did not erase the biological difference between daylight and darkness. A household gathered around a hearth still occupied a largely dark world. The corners of a room vanished. Roads and fields remained difficult to navigate. Fuel had to be collected, purchased, guarded, and rationed. A poor family could not burn unlimited candles simply because someone wished to remain awake. Light carried an economic cost, and that cost placed a practical boundary around the evening. Candles varied enormously in quality. Those made from beeswax burned more cleanly and pleasantly, but were expensive. Tallow candles, produced from animal fat, were more accessible yet could smoke, drip, smell, and attract pests. Rushlights offered a cheaper alternative, using the dried pith of rushes coated in fat. But their flame was narrow and short-lived. Oil lamps depended on the availability of animal, vegetable, or later mineral oils. Every additional hour of illumination consumed something that had to be grown, hunted, rendered, traded, or bought. The uneven distribution of light meant that social class shaped the length of the evening. Wealthy households could afford more candles, larger rooms, servants to maintain lamps, and activities that continued after dark. Courts, churches, workshops, taverns, and urban homes sometimes created bright islands within the night. Poorer families often relied more heavily on the hearth and on daylight itself. The ancient rhythm of sleep was never separated from access to resources. Even so, pre-industrial evenings were not universally short. People told stories, prepared food, repaired clothing, drank, prayed, visited neighbours, and celebrated long after sunset. Markets, festivals, religious observances, and seasonal gatherings could keep communities awake late into the night. The idea that everyone before modern lighting went directly to bed when the sun disappeared is no more accurate than the claim that everyone woke for hours between 2 sleeps. Human beings have always found reasons to resist bedtime. What changed over time was the scale, reliability, and social reach of illumination. Improvements in lamp design made light brighter and more stable. In the late 18th century, the argan lamp used a cylindrical wick and improved airflow to produce a stronger flame than many earlier household lamps. Better fuels and glass chimneys reduced smoke and increased efficiency. Such devices remained beyond the reach of many people, but they pointed toward a night that could be engineered rather than merely endured. Then gaslight entered streets, factories, theatres, shops, and homes. During the 19th century, gas networks spread through major cities, allowing large spaces to be illuminated with an intensity that earlier generations would have found extraordinary. Streets became more navigable after sunset. Businesses remained open later. Public entertainment expanded. Factories could extend production beyond daylight. The evening became commercially valuable. Gaslight did not create safety or comfort without cost. Early systems leaked, smelled, consumed oxygen, heated rooms, and carried the risk of fire or explosion. Outdoor illumination remained uneven, and many neighborhoods stayed dark. Yet the psychological effect was immense. Night could now be occupied on a larger scale. A person no longer needed to remain close to one small flame. Whole streets could participate in wakefulness. As public lighting spread, darkness acquired a new social geography. Illuminated districts drew people toward theatres, cafes, shops, political meetings, and places of worship. Those who could afford leisure gained new evening hours. Those who worked gained longer shifts. Light offered freedom to some and discipline to others. It made the night more sociable while also making it more productive. This gradual expansion placed pressure on older sleep patterns. If evening activity continues later, the first sleep begins later. The available darkness before morning becomes shorter. A long, wakeful interval between two substantial sleeps becomes more difficult to sustain without reducing total rest. Segmented sleep may not disappear because the body loses the ability to produce it, but because the night no longer contains enough unclaimed time. The change was neither immediate nor uniform. Rural areas retained older lighting conditions long after city streets began to glow. Wealthy homes adopted new technologies before poorer ones. Some people continued to sleep in divided patterns while others consolidated their rest. Seasonal variation persisted. Gaslight could extend a winter evening, but the cost of fuel and the habits of a household still mattered. Electric lighting accelerated the transformation. Unlike a candle or oil lamp, electric light could be bright, relatively clean at the point of use, and activated with little effort. It required no wick trimming, oil filling, or constant supervision. As electrical networks expanded, illumination became easier to distribute through homes, streets, factories, offices, and shops. The night was no longer a natural condition modified by scattered flames. It became a space that could be designed. The effect reached beyond visibility. Bright evening light influences circadian timing. It can delay the body's transition toward biological night, especially when exposure becomes regular. People remain alert later, not only because activities are available, but because the light supporting those activities changes when sleepiness arrives. The clock on the wall says that bedtime has come, while the illuminated environment tells the brain that evening is still continuing. Modern light is also stronger and more widespread than earlier flame-based illumination. A candle produces only a small amount of light compared with indoor electrical fixtures, commercial signs, street lamps, televisions, and personal screens. The difference is not simply technological, it alters the contrast between day and night. Many people spend daylight hours inside relatively dim buildings, then remain under artificial illumination late into the evening. The circadian system receives a weaker morning signal and a stronger nighttime one than the outdoor environment would provide. This does not mean artificial light single-handedly destroyed an otherwise universal two-sleep pattern. The historical debate does not support such certainty. Urbanization, changing work schedules, transportation, entertainment, schooling, household design, and the spread of clocks all contributed. In some regions, Segmented sleep may never have been dominant. In others, it may already have varied by season and occupation. Light was one force among several, though an unusually powerful one. Nor should the pre-electric night be romanticized. Darkness limited reading, movement, medical care, social contact, and personal safety. Better lighting reduced some dangers and expanded opportunity. It allowed people to study, work, gather, and travel at times previously constrained by darkness. The same technology that compressed sleep could also improve life in ways few would willingly surrender. The contradiction lies in what happened to the hours gained. Artificial light promised greater control over time, but control rarely meant more rest. Evenings became available for labor, consumption, entertainment, administration, and communication. Bedtime shifted later while morning obligations often remained fixed. The night contracted from both sides. The vocabulary of first and second sleep faded within this changing world. As bedtime moved closer to midnight and the interval before dawn shortened, sleep consolidated into one expected block. Waking in the middle of that block no longer fit comfortably into the schedule. There might be no quiet hour available before a second sleep, only the growing awareness that morning work would begin soon. The deepest change was therefore not simply that homes became brighter. Night acquired a new purpose. It became an extension of the organized day. Streets, shops, and institutions remained active. Time after sunset could be sold, scheduled, measured, and used. Darkness lost some of its authority, but the body did not become independent of darkness. It continued to require sleep inside a society increasingly unwilling to leave long hours unclaimed. Light opened the evening. The next force would close the schedule around it. Bells, clocks, factories, schools, and standardized working time would turn sleep from a flexible negotiation with season into a private obligation squeezed between fixed demands. Once night could be illuminated, it could also be disciplined. The transformation of sleep did not depend on light alone. It required a new way of organizing time, one that treated hours as standardized units rather than flexible responses to season, weather, task, and bodily need. Clocks, bells, factories, schools, transport systems, and urban institutions gradually tightened the day around fixed schedules. Sleep remained biological, but the space available for it became increasingly administrative. Before mechanical timekeeping governed ordinary life, many people worked by task rather than by the minute. Labor began when light, weather, animals, customers, tides, or seasonal necessity made it possible. A field had to be harvested before rain. Bread had to be prepared before market. Livestock required attention according to their own rhythms. Work could be exhausting and highly demanding, but it was not always measured as an identical block beginning and ending at the same clock time each day. This older arrangement was never free from authority. Lords, monasteries, armies, workshops, and cities used bells and rules to coordinate activity long before industrialization. Religious communities divided day and night into periods of prayer. Town bells announced markets, curfews, emergencies, and work. Sailors and guards followed watches, yet clocks were expensive. Local time varied, and many households estimated hours through sunlight, sound, hunger, habit, and the progress of familiar tasks. Mechanical clocks slowly changed that relationship. Public clocks made time visible and audible to larger populations. Personal watches later carried it onto the body. The hour became something that could be checked, compared, sold, lost, and enforced. A worker was not merely late in relation to a task or sunrise. He or she was late according to a number. The spread of factories intensified this discipline. Machines, capital, fuel, and coordinated labor favored continuous operation. Employers needed large groups to arrive together, remain for fixed periods, and perform work according to a shared schedule. Time no longer belonged primarily to the completion of a task, it became part of the product. Factory bells and whistles divided the day with an authority that seasonal light could not negotiate. A dark winter morning no longer justified a later start. A warm afternoon dip did not create an automatic rest period unless management allowed one. Work continued under artificial light, behind walls, beside machines whose rhythm was indifferent to circadian valleys. This did not happen everywhere at once. Industrialization spread unevenly across regions and occupations. Agricultural labor remained tied to weather and season. Domestic work often continued outside formal timekeeping, while still consuming nearly every waking hour. Small workshops preserved flexible customs longer than large factories, yet the cultural ideal of punctual, consolidated time expanded far beyond the places where industrial machinery first appeared. Schools reinforced it. Children and adults had always learned within households, religious institutions, apprenticeships, and communities. But mass schooling required standardized attendance. The school bell trained bodies to wake, travel, eat, concentrate, and rest at prescribed times. Families increasingly organized mornings around departure deadlines rather than sunrise or the completion of household tasks. Bedtime became important because lateness carried social and institutional consequences. Transport added another layer. Coaches, ships, and early railways had schedules, but rail networks demanded greater precision. Different towns once kept local solar time, meaning noon arrived when the sun reached its highest point in that place. Rail travel made those local differences inconvenient and dangerous. Standardized time zones eventually aligned large regions under shared clocks. Noon ceased to be purely local. So did morning. The result was a profound change in the meaning of sleep. Rest became the interval required to prepare for the next scheduled day. Its timing had to fit between work ending and work beginning, between evening obligations and the alarm. A long period of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night might still occur, but it no longer belonged comfortably within the structure of daily life. If a worker begins early, travels to the workplace, and returns late, two substantial nighttime sleeps separated by an hour or more become difficult to sustain. Going to bed early enough to preserve the pattern may be impossible when household duties, meals, social life, or evening labor continue. Waking between sleeps then consumes time that cannot be recovered before morning. The alarm clock crystallized this new relationship. Earlier people had used bells, animals, servants, water clocks, candle marks, and trained waking habits. But affordable household alarms gave a mechanical object direct authority over the sleeping body. Morning no longer began when rest felt complete. It began when the clock announced that private time had expired. The clock also changed the experience of nighttime waking. A person who wakes in darkness can now immediately learn that it is 2:17 in the morning and calculate the remaining time before 6:00. The number converts uncertainty into arithmetic. 4 hours left, then 3, then 2. The attempt to measure lost sleep creates anxiety, and anxiety encourages wakefulness. This may be one reason the middle of the night feels more threatening in modern settings. The body has not necessarily changed, but the consequences of wakefulness have. A pre-industrial sleeper with a flexible morning might use the interval quietly and return to rest when drowsiness returns. A modern worker sees a shrinking allowance before a fixed obligation. The industrial schedule also shaped medical expectations, as consolidated sleep became socially necessary. Uninterrupted sleep increasingly appeared to be the healthy norm. Physicians and reformers promoted regular bedtimes, orderly households, ventilation, moral discipline, and efficient rest. Advice differed across eras, but sleep was gradually treated as a single block that should restore the worker, student, soldier, or citizen for productive daytime activity. This new ideal had practical advantages. Regularity can support circadian stability. A protected nighttime interval may reduce chronic sleep loss. Coordinated schedules make schools, hospitals, transport, and workplaces possible. Consolidated sleep is not an artificial mistake imposed on a body that can only function biphasically. Many people sleep well in one continuous period, and field studies show that consolidated nighttime sleep also occurs in communities with little electric light. The problem arises when one's socially preferred pattern becomes the only acceptable one. Shift workers must often sleep during daylight while their circadian systems promote wakefulness. Night workers may alternate between schedules, preventing stable adaptation. Parents, caregivers, hospital staff, transport workers, security personnel, and emergency responders experience interruptions that do not resemble the calm interval between historical first and second sleep. Their rest may be fragmented by obligation rather than organized around it. The industrial world did not eliminate sleeping twice, it redistributed it. Some workers took brief naps during breaks or travel. Others slept after returning from a night shift, then again before the next one. Domestic workers and labourers rested whenever gaps appeared. Soldiers and sailors maintained watch systems. Poverty and overcrowding often produced irregular sleep that escaped official descriptions. A divided schedule can be restorative when chosen, sufficiently long, and aligned with the body. It can be destructive when created by exhaustion, unstable shifts, multiple jobs, noise, or lack of control. Counting sleep episodes does not reveal whether a person is well rested. The lesser-known contradiction of industrial sleep is that modern societies praised one consolidated nightly block, while building institutions that prevented many people from obtaining it. Factories demanded early arrival. Urban entertainment extended evenings. Artificial light delayed sleep. Transport lengthened commutes. Employers purchased waking hours, while domestic labour consumed the hours outside formal employment. The ideal became more rigid as the conditions required to achieve it became less equal. Over time, the old seasonal night was compressed into a standardized interval. Winter no longer necessarily brought longer rest. Summer no longer automatically changed the workday. The clock held the schedule steady while the planet continued to tilt beneath it. By the 20th century, the expectation of one uninterrupted night had become so ordinary in many industrial societies that older patterns seemed exotic. First sleep and second sleep sounded like relics. The midday nap appeared foreign, rural, childish, or indulgent. Waking at night acquired the language of failure. Yet the body continued to wake. It continued to feel sleepy in the afternoon. It continued to respond to darkness, temperature, routine, age, and individual chronotype. The modern schedule had consolidated the official night, but it had not erased the older flexibility beneath it. That mismatch would turn an ordinary biological event into one of the most persistent anxieties of modern sleep. The room is silent, the clock is visible, and sleep has vanished. A person who was unconscious moments earlier now lies fully aware of darkness, heartbeat, and the number glowing beside the bed. Nothing is obviously wrong, yet the mind begins to search for an explanation. Perhaps tomorrow will be ruined. Perhaps the body has forgotten how to sleep. Perhaps this awakening means illness, stress, aging, or the beginning of permanent insomnia. The fear arrives quickly because modern culture has taught many people to interpret nighttime wakefulness as evidence of failure. Human sleep, however, is not a continuous absence of consciousness. Even a person who remembers sleeping without interruption usually passes through repeated cycles of lighter and deeper sleep, with brief awakenings between them. Most are too short to enter memory. A sleeper changes position, pulls up a blanket, responds to sound, or opens the eyes for a few seconds before drifting back. The seamless night remembered in the morning is partly a construction created by forgetting its small fractures. Longer awakenings also occur without necessarily indicating disease, stress, temperature, noise, alcohol, pain, medication, hormonal change, aging, an unfamiliar room, or the ordinary movement between sleep stages can bring consciousness closer to the surface. The problem is not always the awakening itself, it is what happens after the sleeper notices it. The modern clock turns wakefulness into a countdown. Seeing the hour encourages calculation, and calculation encourages vigilance. If morning begins at 6, waking at 2 appears to leave 4 hours. A later glance shows 3 hours and 20 minutes. Each measurement confirms that sleep is being lost. The body becomes an object under inspection, and the effort to force sleep creates a state incompatible with it. Sleep cannot be commanded in the same way a hand can be closed. It depends on conditions that make surrender possible. Monitoring, judging, and testing whether sleep has returned keep attention active. The person begins listening for signs of drowsiness, then grows frustrated when those signs fail to appear. This cycle can transform a normal awakening into a prolonged period of insomnia. Historical segmented sleep offers a useful contrast, though not a universal cure or a complete explanation. In communities where waking after a first sleep was expected, the event may have carried less alarm. A person could remain still, tend the fire, pray, think, or perform a quiet task without interpreting wakefulness as a medical emergency. The cultural script did not demand immediate unconsciousness. That difference in expectation may have reduced anxiety and allowed sleep to return more easily. Yet it would be misleading to claim that every modern awakening is the return of an ancient two-sleep rhythm. The evidence remains incomplete. Historical first and second sleep appears clearly in some sources, but scholars still debate how common and regular it was. Modern people also live under different light exposure, working schedules, stress, medication, diet, noise, and health conditions. A person awake because of sleep apnea, chronic pain, depression, menopause, or a rotating shift is not simply reenacting a winter night from early modern Europe. The distinction matters because romantic explanations can delay useful care. Repeated awakenings accompanied by breathing difficulty, severe daytime sleepiness, persistent low mood, unusual movements, or significant impairment deserve attention. Nighttime wakefulness can be normal, but it can also signal a treatable problem. No single explanation fully accounts for all interrupted sleep. Age changes the pattern as well. sleep often becomes lighter and more fragmented over the lifespan. Older adults may wake more easily, spend less time in certain deep sleep stages, and experience shifts in circadian timing. They may become sleepy earlier in the evening and wake earlier in the morning. A daytime nap can then reduce nighttime sleep pressure further, especially if it is long or late. This creates another cycle. Poor sleep at night leads to daytime fatigue. Fatigue leads to a long nap. The nap makes sleep harder the following night, which produces more fatigue. The same two-part schedule that works well for one person can become destabilizing for another because timing and total duration differ. Alcohol creates a similar illusion. It may make sleep begin more quickly, but it often disrupts the later part of the night. As its effects change over several hours, sleep can become lighter and more fragmented. A person who uses alcohol to force the first half of the night may find the second half filled with wakefulness. The pattern resembles segmented sleep only in its outward shape. Biologically, it may be far less restorative. Modern bedrooms also contain sources of disturbance unfamiliar in earlier forms. Climate-controlled rooms can become too warm. Traffic, aircraft, notifications, household electronics, and irregular urban noise interrupt sleep without fully waking the sleeper each time. Screens offer immediate stimulation during longer awakenings. A person who once might have stared into darkness can now enter an endless stream of messages, news, entertainment, and artificial light. The device appears to relieve boredom, but it changes the biological and psychological conditions for returning to sleep. Light reaches the eyes. Emotionally charged information increases alertness. The mind leaves the quiet room and enters a social world still active somewhere. Midnight becomes another part of the connected day. This may be one of the sharpest differences between older wakeful intervals and modern ones. Historical night waking often unfolded in low light, reduced movement, and limited stimulation. Even when a person worked or spoke, the surrounding environment continued to signal night. Modern waking can instantly become bright, informationally dense, and socially demanding. The meaning assigned to insomnia has changed too. Industrial life treats daytime alertness as a duty. The worker, driver, student, caregiver, or professional must perform at a fixed hour regardless of what happened during the night. Poor sleep therefore threatens more than comfort. It threatens competence, income, safety, and self-image. The sleeper worries not only about being tired but about failing publicly. That fear is not irrational. Severe sleep loss impairs attention, mood, reaction time, and judgment. The danger lies in treating every temporary awakening as the beginning of severe deprivation. One difficult night rarely destroys a person's ability to function. The body can compensate to some extent, and sleep pressure usually increases the following night. Anxiety magnifies the event by turning uncertainty into catastrophe. The old language of first and second sleep offers a gentler possibility. Wakefulness may sometimes belong inside the night. It need not be celebrated, engineered, or treated as proof that everyone should divide sleep. It can simply be allowed to exist without immediate panic. This attitude resembles methods used in modern behavioral approaches to insomnia, which often reduce clock checking, challenge catastrophic beliefs, and weaken the association between bed and frustrated wakefulness. The goal is not to recreate a historical household or spend hours tending imaginary embers. It is to stop treating sleep as a performance that must be monitored moment by moment. There is a strange irony here. Modern societies possess better mattresses, safer rooms, quieter heating systems, and more control over darkness than most people in history. Yet many sleepers approach the night with extraordinary vigilance. Comfort has improved, while confidence in the body's ability to navigate sleep may have weakened. Historical evidence cannot tell a sleepless person exactly what to do at 3 in the morning. It can, however, challenge the assumption that consciousness at that hour is inherently unnatural. Human sleep has always contained movement, variation, and occasional wakefulness. The perfectly unbroken night may be less a biological standard than a remembered ideal. Once this fear is softened, another question becomes possible. If segmented sleep clearly existed, why has it been so easy to describe it as humanity's original and universal rhythm? The answer lies in the appeal of lost natural order stories, the selectivity of historical evidence, and a debate that has become more complicated with every new source. The story of segmented sleep has all the qualities that make a historical idea travel quickly. It is surprising, easy to remember, and personally relevant. It offers a hidden explanation for an experience many people know, waking in the middle of the night and wondering why sleep has broken apart. It also fits a familiar modern narrative in which industrial life has separated humanity from a healthier ancestral pattern. Before clocks, factories, and electric light, the story suggests, people slept as nature intended. Then modernity compressed the night and taught the body to ignore its original design. There is truth inside this account, but the truth becomes less secure when it is expanded into a universal law. Historical evidence strongly indicates that first sleep and second sleep were recognized in some European societies. Laboratory evidence shows that prolonged darkness can encourage a 2-part nighttime pattern. Human physiology clearly permits segmented rest. None of this proves that all pre-industrial people, all hunter-gatherers, or all human ancestors regularly slept in 2 equal blocks. The disagreement between historians A. Roger Kirch and Niall Boyce illustrates how the same archive can support different conclusions. Kirch's work assembled an impressive range of references to first sleep, second sleep, and activities between them. The scale and variety of the material make it difficult to dismiss the pattern as a handful of isolated accidents. The language appears in court records, literature, religious guidance, and medical writing across long periods. At least in some regions, divided sleep was familiar enough to require little explanation. Boyce's challenge is not that these words never existed. It is that their frequency and meaning may have been overstated. A phrase can identify a possibility without describing a nightly rule. Someone who is awakened once may speak of sleeping again. A writer may use inherited language that readers recognize but do not follow regularly. A medical author may recommend behavior that few people practice. Historical examples show that segmented sleep occurred, but they do not automatically reveal the percentage of nights or people involved. This is a problem of historical scale. Archives preserve incidents, not averages. A court document survives because something happened. A diary records the unusual more often than the routine. Literature favors moments worth describing. If a person slept continuously for decades, those nights may leave no trace. If one night was interrupted by footsteps outside, it may enter the record because the interruption later mattered. The reverse problem is also possible. A habit can be so ordinary that no one bothers to explain it. The casual use of first sleep may indicate a shared cultural understanding precisely because writers assumed readers already knew the pattern. Silence and repetition can therefore point in opposite directions. One may hide common practice, the other may exaggerate it through selective preservation. Geography remains a larger obstacle. Much of the strongest written evidence comes from Europe. especially early modern England and neighbouring regions. These societies experienced long winter nights, limited household lighting, and traditions that may have encouraged nocturnal prayer or domestic wakefulness. Their sleeping pattern cannot simply be projected onto equatorial Africa, Arctic communities, pastoral Asia, tropical South America, or prehistoric populations living tens of thousands of years earlier. Even the phrase pre-industrial society conceals enormous diversity. A coastal fishing village, an urban household, a nomadic camp, a monastery, a desert caravan, and a farming settlement do not share the same night. Their temperatures, dangers, work schedules, architecture, food systems, and social customs differ. The absence of electric light is only one variable among many. Modern field research makes the universal claim harder to sustain. Studies among Hadza, San, and Tsimane communities found that extended midnight waking was uncommon, and daytime naps occurred on a minority of days. These findings challenge the idea that people living with strong natural light-dark cycles spontaneously divide sleep in the same way. The research does not disprove historical segmented sleep, nor does it reveal a pure prehistoric condition. Present-day non-industrial communities are modern populations with their own histories, technologies, trade connections, environmental changes, and political realities. No living society can serve as a transparent window into the Stone Age. Still, objectively measured sleep in these groups demonstrates that life without widespread electricity does not automatically produce first sleep, a long wakeful interval, and second sleep. Thomas Wehr's experiment is similarly important and limited. Under 14 hours of darkness, 7 participants developed a biphasic pattern. The result is powerful evidence that the human sleep system can organize itself this way. Yet a small laboratory study cannot establish what entire populations did throughout history. 14 hours of enforced darkness resembles certain winter conditions more closely than an annual global norm. This distinction between capacity and default is essential. Humans can adapt to eating at different times, working under different schedules, and sleeping in different arrangements. A pattern that appears reliably under one condition may still be only one option within a flexible system. Segmented sleep may emerge when darkness is long, evening stimulation is limited, and morning obligations allow enough time. Consolidated sleep may emerge when the sleep window is shorter, or when environmental conditions support uninterrupted rest. The appeal of universality often comes from a desire for certainty. Modern sleepers want to know whether their bodies are behaving correctly. A lost ancestral schedule offers a reassuring answer. If waking at night is ancient, then perhaps nothing is wrong. But replacing one rigid expectation with another creates a new problem. A person who sleeps well for 8 uninterrupted hours may begin to wonder whether that pattern is unnatural. Someone who cannot nap may believe they have lost a fundamental human rhythm. The historical story becomes another standard against which the body can fail. The evidence points toward a less dramatic but more useful conclusion. Humans probably did not evolve around one fixed arrangement of sleep. They evolved the ability to adjust rest to changing conditions. Some environments favored one long nighttime block, others encouraged 2 nighttime phases. Some societies institutionalized midday rest. Others depended on individual differences so that the group was never entirely asleep. This flexibility is visible even within families. One person sleeps early and rises early. Another remains alert later. An older adult wakes before dawn. A laborer naps after an exhausting morning. A light sleeper responds to sound while others remain unconscious. The collective pattern can be divided even when each individual's sleep is not. There is also a danger in using the word natural without defining it. Electric light is a human invention, but so are fire, houses, bedding, clothing, and organized nighttime watches. Culture has shaped sleep for an immense span of human evolution. There was never a purely biological night untouched by tools, social rules, or learned behavior. Once humans controlled fire and slept in cooperative groups, their rest was already cultural. The modern world is not outside nature either. Circadian systems still respond to light and darkness. Sleep pressure still accumulates. Temperature still matters. What has changed is the environment through which those signals pass. Artificial light, fixed schedules, climate control, transport, and digital stimulation modify the conditions under which an anciently flexible system operates. No single explanation fully accounts for the decline of first and second sleep language. Artificial light likely contributed. Later bedtimes and fixed morning schedules narrowed the night. Urban entertainment and industrial labor changed evening activity. Medical ideals increasingly favored consolidated rest. Yet the old pattern may also have been less uniform than the story of its disappearance implies. The most accurate reconstruction is therefore uneven. Segmented sleep was real. It may have been common in certain communities, especially under long nights. It was biologically possible and culturally meaningful. It was not necessarily universal, continuous across all seasons, or identical across social groups. That conclusion does not weaken the mystery. It deepens it. Instead of uncovering one lost timetable, the evidence reveals a species capable of arranging sleep in several ways. The past does not hand modern people a single rule to restore. It shows how strongly bodies respond to environment and expectation. This becomes especially important when ancient rhythms are revived in modern forms. Naps, split schedules, shift work sleep, and deliberately engineered polyphasic routines are often placed under the same label, even though their health effects and biological demands can differ sharply. The old flexibility remains, but modern experiments with it do not always recreate the conditions that once made divided sleep workable. The old flexibility has not disappeared. It has reappeared under new names, new pressures, and new technologies. Some people take a short afternoon nap. Others divide sleep around night shifts, split work days, long commutes, religious practice, or caregiving. A smaller group deliberately experiments with highly structured schedules that divide rest into several short episodes. All of these patterns are often described as biphasic or polyphasic sleep, but the similarity can be superficial. Two schedules may contain the same number of sleep periods while placing completely different demands on the body. The simplest modern biphasic pattern combines a main nighttime sleep with a daytime nap. This arrangement can be practical when the nap is brief, occurs early enough, and does not reduce total nighttime rest. It resembles traditions found in many societies, but modern life changes its context. A person may nap because the afternoon circadian dip creates genuine sleepiness. Another may nap because a late work schedule has shortened the previous night. A third may fall asleep unintentionally because of illness, medication, sleep apnea, or chronic exhaustion. The behavior looks the same from a distance, but its meaning is different. Short naps can temporarily improve alertness, reaction time, mood, and some aspects of cognitive performance. These benefits are most obvious when a person is sleep-deprived or must remain awake for an unusually long period. Even after a normal night, a brief rest during the afternoon valley can restore concentration for several hours. This helps explain why pilots, medical staff, transport workers, military personnel, and others in safety-sensitive occupations have sometimes used controlled naps as a fatigue management tool. Yet a nap is not always immediately refreshing. Sleep inertia can produce grogginess, slowed thinking, and disorientation after waking, especially when the sleeper enters deeper stages. The longer the nap, the greater the chance that waking occurs from deep sleep. A person may plan to rest for 20 minutes and emerge an hour later feeling worse than before. Timing matters as much as duration. A late afternoon or evening nap can reduce sleep pressure enough to delay the main nighttime sleep. This is why modern advice often distinguishes a short strategic nap from a long compensatory one. The first is planned to support alertness without replacing the night. The second may be a sign that the main sleep period is inadequate or disturbed. The distinction is not absolute. An individual response varies, but it prevents the simple claim that all naps are either healthy or harmful. Observational research adds complexity. Studies involving large populations have sometimes found associations between long or frequent daytime naps and higher rates of cardiovascular disease, metabolic problems, or mortality. More recent work in older adults has also linked certain napping patterns, including longer or more frequent naps and sleep occurring unusually early in the day, with poorer outcomes. These results do not prove that napping causes disease. People with declining health, fragmented nighttime sleep, reduced activity, or undiagnosed disorders may nap more because they are already unwell. The nap can therefore function as both behavior and signal. In one person, it may be a useful part of a stable schedule. In another, it may reveal that something is disrupting nighttime rest. The evidence remains incomplete, and no single duration creates the same effect in every age group, culture, or health condition. Shift work produces a more difficult form of divided sleep. A night worker may sleep after returning home, wake for family or daily obligations, then sleep again before the next shift. This is biphasic in structure, but it often occurs during a biological daytime when the circadian system promotes wakefulness. Daylight, noise, temperature, and social activity make sleep shorter and lighter. The worker may accumulate the same total hours on paper while receiving less restorative rest. Rotating shifts are especially disruptive because the schedule changes before the biological clock can adapt. A person may work nights for several days, switch to mornings, and then attempt to return to a daytime social life. Sleep becomes fragmented not because the body has rediscovered an ancient rhythm, but because competing schedules pull it in different directions. This distinction is central to current research on biphasic sleep among shift workers. Dividing sleep may help some people obtain more total rest when one long daytime sleep is impossible. A second planned sleep before work can improve alertness, but the success of the schedule depends on regularity, light exposure, timing, and the ability to protect both sleep periods. The label alone predicts very little. Modern remote work and flexible scheduling have created another return of divided rest. Some people no longer need to remain continuously present in one workplace from morning to evening. They may begin early, pause for a nap, and continue later. For a person with a natural afternoon dip and enough control over the day, this can feel more sustainable than forcing continuous work. Yet flexibility can also dissolve boundaries, extending labor into evenings and reducing the main sleep period. Freedom from the office does not automatically produce freedom for the body. Students often adopt accidental biphasic schedules. They sleep briefly at night, attend classes, then collapse in the afternoon. The second sleep appears to restore function, but it may also reinforce late-night wakefulness. Over time, the pattern can drift away from a stable circadian schedule. The problem is not that sleep occurs twice. It is that total sleep remains insufficient and timing changes unpredictably. Parents and caregivers may also sleep in multiple episodes because uninterrupted rest is not available. This fragmentation should not be confused with an idealized ancestral pattern. A calm interval between two sufficient sleeps differs sharply from repeated awakenings imposed by responsibility, worry, or noise. The body measures not only total duration but continuity, timing, and the ability to complete normal sleep cycles. At the more extreme end are polyphasic schedules designed to divide sleep into 3 or more short episodes while sharply reducing the total amount. These systems are often promoted under names that promise efficiency, discipline, or extra waking hours. The idea is that the body can be trained to enter restorative stages more quickly, allowing a person to function on several brief naps instead of a full night. The evidence does not support these claims for most people. Expert reviews have found no established health benefit from extreme sleep reduction schedules and substantial reason for caution. Chronic restriction impairs attention, emotional regulation, memory, immune function, and metabolic health, even when the person begins to feel accustomed to fatigue. Subjective adaptation can be misleading. People may report that they are functioning normally while objective performance continues to decline. Historical examples are sometimes used to justify these experiments. Famous inventors, soldiers, sailors, and political leaders are said to have slept in brief episodes, though many stories are poorly documented or exaggerated. Even when unusual schedules were real, they do not prove safety. A person can maintain a demanding pattern for a period without demonstrating that it is healthy or sustainable. The difference between biphasic sleep and extreme polyphasic sleep is therefore crucial. A full nighttime sleep combined with a short nap may preserve adequate total rest. 2 substantial sleep periods can also work under certain conditions. A schedule that replaces most nighttime sleep with scattered naps is another matter entirely. It asks flexibility to become exemption, as if the body's ability to divide rest means it no longer needs enough of it. Modern wearable devices have added a new layer of fascination. Watches and rings estimate sleep stages, duration, and efficiency, encouraging people to experiment with timing. These tools can reveal patterns, but they can also intensify monitoring. A person may become anxious about a low score after feeling rested, or attempt to force an ideal architecture that consumer devices cannot measure perfectly. The old problem returns in digital form. Sleep becomes a performance judged by numbers. A nap that feels restorative may be rejected because the device labels it poorly. A normal awakening may become evidence of failure. Technology offers information, but information does not always create trust. The modern return of sleeping twice is therefore not a simple revival. Sometimes it reflects biological preference. Sometimes it is a cultural choice. Sometimes it is compensation for an exhausted life. Sometimes it is imposed by work that ignores circadian timing. The same ancient flexibility that allowed humans to adapt can also be exploited by schedules that demand too much. What matters is not whether sleep occurs once or twice, but whether the pattern provides enough rest, remains reasonably stable, supports daytime function, and fits the individual's biology and circumstances. History proves that consolidated sleep is not the only possible arrangement. It does not prove that every divided schedule is wise. Science has not declared a winner between sleeping once and sleeping twice. The evidence does not support a simple contest in which one pattern is natural and the other artificial, one healthy and the other harmful. What matters most is whether sleep is sufficient, well-timed, reasonably regular, and restorative for the person living through it. The number of sleep episodes is only one part of that larger picture. Modern sleep research usually begins with total duration, because the body requires enough time to move through repeated cycles of non-rapid eye movement and rapid eye movement sleep. These stages support memory, emotional regulation, immune function, tissue repair, metabolic control, and attention. Dividing sleep does not automatically prevent those processes. If the two periods are long enough and placed appropriately, the body can still pass through the necessary stages. The difficulty begins when division becomes a disguise for restriction. A person who sleeps 6.5 hours at night and takes a restorative 30-minute nap may function well. Another who sleeps 4 hours at night and relies on irregular daytime dozing may accumulate chronic sleep debt. Both are technically sleeping twice, but their biological situations are not equivalent. Research becomes confusing when these patterns are grouped together under the same label. The timing of the second sleep is especially important. A nap taken in the early afternoon often aligns with a natural reduction in alertness. It may improve reaction time, vigilance, mood, and some forms of memory for several hours afterward. Systematic reviews have generally found that short daytime naps can support cognitive performance, particularly after inadequate nighttime sleep. The effect is not magical, and it does not replace the need for a full night, but it can be useful. The benefit often depends on how the sleeper wakes. A very short nap may end before deeper sleep develops, reducing the risk of sleep inertia. A longer nap can provide more recovery and may include slow wave or rapid eye movement sleep. But waking from a deeper stage can leave a person confused and heavy for a period. The best duration therefore depends on the purpose of the nap, the time available afterward, and the individual's sensitivity to grogginess. Memory research adds another layer. Sleep soon after learning can help stabilize new information, and a nap may support this process when it includes the appropriate stages. Some studies report improvements in perceptual learning, motor skill, and factual memory after daytime sleep. Yet the size of the effect varies, and laboratory tasks do not always translate neatly into everyday life. A student may remember material better after a nap, but not if the nap pushes bedtime so late that the following night is shortened. Nighttime sleep remains especially important because its architecture changes across the night. Deep slow-wave sleep tends to be more concentrated earlier, while rapid eye movement sleep becomes more prominent toward morning. Cutting off the final hours of the night and replacing them with a brief nap may not recreate the same balance. A divided schedule can work, but the pieces are not always interchangeable. This is one reason extreme polyphasic systems are so poorly supported. They often assume that sleep stages can be compressed on demand into short episodes. The body may adapt somewhat to repeated timing, but there is no strong evidence that healthy adults can safely reduce total sleep to a few hours by training themselves to enter deep or dreaming sleep immediately. Chronic restriction continues to impair performance, even when subjective sleepiness begins to feel familiar. The health effects of ordinary napping are more difficult to interpret because much of the evidence is observational. Large cohort studies often find that long or frequent naps are associated with cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, or higher mortality. Similar associations have appeared in studies of older adults using objective activity measurements. Yet correlation does not reveal direction. A person may nap for long periods because nighttime sleep is disturbed by pain, breathing problems, depression, medication, or chronic disease. Reduced daytime activity can also increase the opportunity to sleep. In such cases, the nap may be a marker of declining health rather than its cause. Researchers attempt to adjust for these factors, but no statistical model can remove every hidden difference between people who nap and those who do not. Short naps often show weaker or no harmful associations in these analyses, which has led to the suggestion that duration matters. Even this conclusion should remain cautious. Cultural context changes what a nap means. In a society where midday rest is routine, a 30-minute sleep may fit into a stable schedule. In a society where napping is uncommon, the same behavior may occur mainly among people who are exhausted or unwell. Age further complicates the picture. Younger adults may use naps to recover from sleep loss or support performance. Older adults often experience lighter nighttime sleep and earlier circadian timing, making daytime sleep more likely. A brief nap can be pleasant and functional, but a long one may weaken nighttime sleep pressure and contribute to a cycle of fragmented rest. Children also commonly sleep more than once across the day during early development, though the pattern changes as the nervous system matures. This does not establish biphasic sleep as the ideal adult state. It shows that sleep organization shifts across the lifespan. The body does not follow one fixed architecture from infancy to old age. Genetic studies support the idea that napping tendency is partly inherited. Some people may be biologically more inclined toward daytime sleep, early waking, or general sleepiness. But genes do not operate outside environment. Work schedules, illness, caffeine, light exposure, cultural permission, and nighttime sleep quality all influence whether that tendency becomes a regular nap. The emerging scientific view is increasingly personalized. A theoretical framework proposed in recent sleep research suggests that biphasic schedules may suit some individuals and circumstances, but the model remains hypothesis-generating rather than definitive. Long-term controlled trials are still limited. Researchers do not yet know enough to prescribe one form of divided sleep as superior for broad populations. Shift workers illustrate why personalization matters. A planned sleep before a night shift can improve alertness, while a second sleep after work may help increase total duration. Yet daytime sleeping occurs against strong circadian wake signals and is often shortened by light and noise. A split strategy may be better than one adequate sleep period, but it does not remove the biological strain of working at night. Regularity may be as important as division. The circadian system responds to repeated timing. A stable biphasic schedule can be easier for the body to anticipate than a constantly shifting consolidated one. Conversely, a person who naps unpredictably, stays awake late on some nights, rises early on others, and changes light exposure from day to day may experience greater disruption, even if total sleep appears adequate. Recent work on lifestyle timing supports this broader idea. Habitual patterns of light exposure, meals, movement, and sleep are closely related to circadian phase. A single unusual day may not reset the system, but repeated routines can gradually shift it. The body learns the schedule it encounters most often. This helps explain why two people can respond differently to the same nap. One falls asleep easily at night afterward. The other remains alert until well past midnight. One wakes refreshed after 20 minutes. The other experiences prolonged sleep inertia. Chronotype, age, previous sleep, health, and routine all influence the result. Science therefore offers fewer universal rules than popular sleep advice often suggests. It does not say that everyone should nap. It does not say that no one should. It does not confirm that waking between two nighttime sleeps is the hidden natural state of humanity. Nor does it treat every awakening as abnormal. The most reliable principles remain broader. The pattern should provide enough total sleep. It should support alertness and mood rather than chronic fatigue. It should remain reasonably consistent. It should not be maintained through constant stimulants or forced restriction. Persistent breathing problems, severe daytime sleepiness, or major impairment should not be explained away as ancestral rhythm. The body is flexible, but flexibility is not immunity. Humans can sleep in one block, in two phases, and occasionally in several episodes when circumstances demand it. What science increasingly reveals is not a forgotten perfect schedule, but a range of workable arrangements bounded by biological needs. The ancient rhythm survives not as a command, but as a possibility. The ancient rhythm behind sleeping twice a day does not lead to a single lost schedule waiting to be restored. It leads instead to a more unsettling and more liberating conclusion. Human sleep has always been adaptable, and the meaning of a good night has always depended partly on the world around the sleeper. Darkness, season, temperature, safety, labor, architecture, belief, and social expectation all entered the bed long before electric light or digital screens existed. The body carried its own needs, but those needs were never expressed in isolation. This is why the history of sleep resists simple nostalgia. The pre-industrial night was not a paradise of perfect biological alignment. It could be cold, smoky, crowded, noisy, and dangerous. People woke because fires needed attention, animals moved, pain intruded, work began early, or another person stirred nearby. Some communities may have recognized a calm interval between first and second sleep. Others appear to have slept largely in one nighttime block. Some cultures made room for midday rest, while others did not. Even within the same household, sleep differed by age, health, responsibility, and chronotype. What has changed most dramatically may not be the body itself, but the story surrounding it. Modern societies often tell sleepers that success means falling asleep quickly, remaining unconscious for a prescribed number of hours, and waking at a socially useful moment. The night becomes a performance judged by clocks, applications, wearable devices, productivity, and memory. A person can wake feeling restored and still become anxious because a device reports poor efficiency. Another can spend a quiet hour awake at night and assume that the entire following day has already been damaged. The historical evidence offers a different way to interpret variation. It shows that waking between sleeps was not always treated as failure, that resting during the day was not always treated as weakness, and that communities could organize time around more than one legitimate rhythm. This does not mean everyone should revive segmented sleep. It means that the boundaries of normal human rest are wider than one industrial ideal. That widening matters because anxiety changes sleep. The more urgently a person tries to produce unconsciousness, the more alert the mind can become. Clocks invite calculation. Devices invite evaluation. Work schedules turn every waking minute into a threat to tomorrow's performance. The ancient household, with all its discomforts, sometimes possessed an advantage. Modern bedrooms lack a cultural place for wakefulness inside the night. There is no need to romanticize that place to learn from it. A person awake at midnight does not have to imagine living in a candlelit village or divide the night deliberately into two equal halves. The older rhythm suggests something quieter. Sleep may arrive, recede, and return. The body can move through darkness without obeying a perfect script. A temporary awakening can remain temporary if it is not immediately transformed into evidence of disorder. The same lesson applies to daytime sleep. The afternoon dip is neither a command nor an illusion. It is one opening among several in the daily cycle. For some people, a short nap fits naturally into that opening and improves the hours that follow. For others, it delays nighttime sleep or signals that the main sleep period is inadequate. The wise question is not whether napping is ancient, but whether it supports a stable and sufficient pattern in the life being lived now. Human beings have always altered their environment, and sleep has always changed with those alterations. Fire extended the evening, shelters reduced exposure, bedding changed comfort, bells coordinated communities, gaslight opened streets, factories standardized labor, electricity weakened seasonal darkness, screens carried the social world into bed. None of these inventions simply destroyed a pure natural rhythm. Each shifted the negotiation between biology and culture. The newest research continues to complicate the old story. Comparisons across industrial and non-industrial societies do not show that modern people always sleep less. Some large industrial populations sleep longer and more efficiently, even while showing weaker circadian signals. Communities without widespread electricity do not all nap daily or wake for hours between two nighttime sleeps. The past and present cannot be divided neatly into healthy nature and damaged modernity. What modern life often weakens is not sleep duration alone, but the strength of environmental timing. Bright nights, dim indoor days, irregular meals, rotating shifts, and changing schedules blur signals that were once more distinct. The body still adapts, but adaptation becomes harder when every day offers a different set of instructions. A stable biphasic schedule may suit one person better than a chaotic consolidated one. A regular single block may suit another better than an unpredictable sequence of naps. The central truth is flexibility bounded by need. Humans can sleep in one period or two. They can adjust to seasonal darkness, afternoon heat, communal living, travel, and work. But they cannot endlessly bargain away total rest without consequence. Flexibility allows variation. It does not abolish biology. The body may tolerate irregularity for a time, yet memory, mood, metabolism, attention, and immune function eventually reveal the cost. This is where the ancient rhythm becomes most relevant. It does not offer permission to sleep less. It offers permission to think less rigidly. It reminds us that a good pattern is one that provides enough rest, aligns reasonably with the body's timing, supports waking life, and can be sustained without constant struggle. For some, that will mean one continuous night. For others, it may include a brief afternoon sleep under certain seasonal or personal conditions. It may include a quiet interval between two nighttime rests. The mystery is not why humans once slept twice and then forgot. The deeper mystery is how one species learned to sleep in so many different ways while continuing to recognize the same inward descent, the loosening of thought, the fading of the room, the passage into dreams, and the return to awareness. Across centuries, technologies changed, houses changed, clocks changed, and the words for sleep changed. The need itself remained. Long before alarms, people woke to cold air, birds, bells, animals, light, and the movements of others. Today, morning may begin with a vibration beside the bed, yet the transition is still ancient. Consciousness rises gradually. Dreams dissolve before they can be held. The body gathers itself from a place no historian can fully reconstruct, and no device can completely measure. Perhaps that is why sleep leaves such fragile evidence. Civilizations build walls, carve names, bury objects, and record laws, but most nights disappear without trace. Billions of first sleeps, second sleeps, naps, dreams, and midnight awakenings passed through human lives and vanished by morning. Only scattered words remain a witness who heard a door after first sleep, a physician who advised rest before the second, a traveller who tended a fading fire, a worker who closed the eyes during the heat of day. Those fragments do not reveal one perfect ancestral pattern. They reveal people adapting. They slept when safety allowed, when labour paused, when darkness deepened, when heat became unbearable, and when the body finally insisted. Their nights were shaped by worlds now gone, just as ours are shaped by systems future generations may find strange. And so the story ends not with a rule, but with an image. Somewhere in a house without clocks, the fire settles into red light. A person wakes after several hours and listens. Nothing urgent moves beyond the walls. The room is cold, but familiar. Another sleeper breathes nearby. For a little while, there is no demand to be productive. No glowing number counting down the remaining night. No fear that wakefulness itself is wrong. The person lies still. Thoughts rise and pass. The darkness is not empty, only quiet. Sleep has gone, but it has not been lost. Beyond the roof, stars continue their slow movement. The night does not hurry. Time is measured by cooling embers, distant animals, and the gradual return of drowsiness. Eventually the eyes close again, and the second descent comes without ceremony. Morning will erase most of it. Work will begin, fires will be rebuilt, doors opened, roads taken, and stories carried forward. The private interval between sleeps will leave almost nothing behind. Yet across centuries faint traces survive. They remind us that human life has never moved to one rhythm alone. Bodies adjust, cultures change, and habits that seem permanent fade into mystery. What feels natural in one age can become unfamiliar in the next. Sleep remains older than every clock built to measure it. It passes beneath empires, inventions, and forgotten names. Each night, consciousness loosens its hold, and the world continues without us for a while. Then, whether after one sleep or two, we return.